This episode of the Better 2 podcast is brought to you by Kitty Mystic and DM Needham, author of the Better to Burn Out series. Welcome to the Better 2 podcast with your host, DM Needham. I'm your host, Donna. Hi, gang. Hope you're doing well today. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing Gerald Everett Jones, and we talk about his book, Preacher Stalls the Second Coming. So what does that entail? It was a very interesting conversation. We do talk a lot about the book, but we talk about the aspects around the book. And that deals with cults, it deals with religion, it deals with fear, and numerous other topics. So stay tuned. Hey, Donna from the Better 2 podcast here. If you've listened to my show, you know that it always sounds great. That's thanks to the guys at Third Year Audio Productions. Third Year Audio helps podcasters, broadcasters, musicians, and business owners get their important messages out to their audience. Rich and the Third Year Audio team are easy to work with, they're efficient, and understand that your message is important to you. With quick turnaround and the true caring of your needs, Third Year Audio is your go-to for any audio message. Reach out to Third Year Audio at 312-388-5596. Rich and his team will deliver for you. That's 312-388-5596, or you could email them at info@thirdyearaudio.com or visit them on the web at www.thirdyearaudio.com. Hi, Gerald. How are you doing?
Donna, I'm tip-top today, tip-top on the left coast, the west side of the country, just blocks from the beautiful Pacific Ocean. Nice. And although it's been chilly here, I have been told that it is really bad form for Californians to complain about weather.
Well, no, us, we had a couple of weeks where it was -14 with a -30 wind chill and like a foot of snow. And yeah, the car was dead and everything else, but that's beside the point. But we look at those things because, see, I'm originally from New Orleans. So I'm used to that joke now of, when I was a kid, 32 degrees with the floor furnace, it was freezing. And we lived right off the river, so a couple blocks. And so I would assume, kind of being off the ocean, you get a nice breeze. And that just adds to that cold feeling even more so.
It's that old Mark Twain expression, the coldest winter I ever spent was in San Francisco one summer. And it can feel just, yes, it can feel very uncomfortable. But I actually had the good fortune to get stuck in Nashville in the blizzard just a few weeks ago. My youngest brother and his wife both work at the Country Music Hall of Fame. And nice. So I had the distinct pleasure of getting conducted through many years of the evolution of country music. It was started by an African-American in 1922. I did not know that.
Wow. I did not know that either. So I've learned something.
Very first country music musician. I just remember the name. It wasn't the name that registered with me, but wow, yes, what a heritage. And the other thing that really struck me, I was impressed. Taylor Swift had gifted the museum with $2 million for a child development center. Nice. And this, you go to museums and you'll see this cubicle, the youth exploration discovery, you get to feel rocks or look at fish or something. This is easily 3 blocks long. I mean, the children can go in there and pluck and play with whatever instrument it happens to be there. They can hum music, and the docents will help them put it down on the treble clef and nice. Post it on the wall. Nice. I mean, it's really very, again, and we can come right back to the best thing, the most valuable thing that any teacher can give a student is curiosity. Mm-hmm. And especially now that information is at our fingertips, even unreliable information at times. But if you want to be a data driller, that's fine. But you need the curiosity to drive your searches.
Well, I have a friend who is a former teacher, and she was stating just the other day, actually, it was yesterday, we were talking, and she said that, now they are standardized testing. So it's not, we used to have it once a year when I was a teenager or a kid, and now it's like every quarter. And they're spending so much time teaching standardized testing that you're losing a lot of other things, such as the arts and such as creativity. And a lot of schools don't want to fund the arts. And that's a sad thing because without creativity, yeah, great, curiosity and creativity go hand in hand. And if all you're doing is being a hamster on a wheel, that's always the best analogy I like, is because on a hamster on a wheel, you're just going and going and going and going, and your mind is just focused on just going. You're never going to explore. You're never going to look outside.
Well, we have in our society, especially in recent years, a preoccupation with metrics,
Mm-hmm.
with what is measurable. And actually, I was co-author on a book called PMP Certification for Dummies. And that is a discipline. Project management is a formal discipline that relies very heavily on metrics. But the joke that we would tell about that was, here's Gerald, project manager, and he's complaining about Donna. Donna's, I've been looking at the metrics, and he says, supervisor, the manager, her productivity has just gone down precipitously in recent months. I don't know what's going on with her. And they said, well, if you'd step into her cube next door, you'd realize she's 8 months pregnant.
Ah, yeah.
So, I mean, the idea of not going down on the factory floor, the idea of not observing firsthand, getting your hands dirty, however you want to express it. Numbers are going to give you, yes, they're going to give you a picture, but it's not the whole picture. It's certainly not the picture as long as we have human personality. And again, we can go off in that AI direction of will robots have personality? But, as long as there are those subjective factors, because again, we are storytelling creatures,
Mm-hmm.
and that's one major way that we build community, is we convey our feelings through stories. And the way that we decide to act as a result of those feelings shapes our behavior, shapes our future. And so our decision making is, let's put it this way, typically we use metrics to convince ourselves that our feelings were right to begin with.
Mm-hmm. Validation.
We make our decision and then it's okay, well, I'm right after all.
Yeah. And I mean, you're talking about AI briefly. Back in 2001, I believe it was either 2000, 2001, I was working at a certain insurance company, and they decided that they were going to roll out this program. And of course, we didn't call it AI back then, but it was all about questions. You had to fill out this form, while you were taking a recorded statement for a left turn interview. So, left turn car accident. Okay. Because it was going to determine the liability for you.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, here's the problem. It didn't take into consideration all the other things that go into this. It only had certain things. And I mean, I ran across a couple of claims. I'm like, I can't use this. This is not how this accident played out. They didn't have every scenario. And so at the time, we didn't look at it as AI. It was very limited, but it would come up with, this is the percentage it should be.
Mm-hmm.
But you're not, like you said, you're not taking the human aspect into it. And I think that hurts a lot, especially in corporate America, because as I said, I worked in insurance. You have all those numbers, you have all these things. And the numbers were so bad at one point that the insurance company would be like, okay, end of month, we need those numbers. So close files. If you have to reopen them in 30 days, that's fine. Just close them. Because we're trying to get the actuary numbers right. So, I mean, it's a numbers game all over the place. And it's like numbers don't always work. As you said, it gives us validation, sure. But is it a true validation if you're closing files that you're going to reopen? That's smoke and mirrors right there.
Understood. Well, we also see on a daily basis evidence of what has been called the separation of classes. We've got billionaires getting richer, and we've got the core of our populace being somewhat hollowed out. And that has a lot to do with automation. It has a lot to do with the fact that it takes fewer and fewer people to run even large companies. And the insurance example that you gave is very appropriate. Is that, you know, if I fill out a claim form online,
Mm-hmm.
if I have ticked all the right boxes, if my case is conforms with the algorithm, it's going to sail through that automated system, and the check's going to end up, you know, in the mail. Now, it used to be, and back again when I flew a desk and do some business consulting with these, you know, a room full of 300, you know, people wearing headsets answering phones for, you know, claims service.
Mm-hmm.
Those people are not needed as much anymore because they're only needed for exceptions. What is no exceptions? And what you were describing was the injustice of the algorithm handling
Yeah.
exceptions. But you see, if there are fewer people there to handle exceptions, guess what? There are fewer managers needed to manage them.
Oh yeah, and I mean, you can take it all the way down to McDonald's, because that was my very first job, and I worked the drive-through. So when you, I mean, I worked the that's so when drive-through was brand new. So and you didn't take credit cards, and you had to make your own drinks. You had to, you know, make sure your order was on. You were running on a clock. You had to do all of it. If the front end was busy, you had no help, and you had to do it all. And that was one drive-through. And then some moron would come through and say, "I want 50 of your 10-cent hamburgers." Okay, you couldn't, but anyway. But my point is, so now if you go through, which I haven't been to McDonald's in 5 years, which I know everybody's like, oh my gosh, but no, I haven't. But the fact is, now you pull up, you say what you want. That machine is most likely already making that drink. They don't even
Mhm.
have to touch it. It's already being done. And so at a certain point, when, you know, one of the appropriate high school jobs that we used to have, just going to go away because everything is automated, you know?
The other topic, since we've talked about AI, let's talk about the other two-letter technology, VR. And that brings me to this book, the fourth in the Preacher Evan Wycliffe series, which is coming out March the 5th, by the way. There actually was, and it was one of the inspirations for the story. There actually was a plot by the U.S. intelligence community back in the early 1960s to fake the second coming of Christ. And it is in the Church Commission report. It's the part that they will let you read is really not very big. It's probably less than a page. But what was going to happen was they were going to. They didn't have the overwhelming ambition to reach everybody on Earth. They knew that was not possible. But what they were going to do is they were going to park a submarine off the coast of Cuba, and they were going to fire off a bunch of stuff. And then they're going to have loudspeakers. But the idea was that they were going to convince the faithful Cuban population that Christ had come again. And the message was going to be that Fidel is the Antichrist. So you've got to rise up against him. Now, this was if you remember your history, this was along about the same time that the Plan B was an exploding cigar.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
this plot didn't go very far. And so I knew of that. And I knew also with advanced VR and 3D holography and other technologies. Actually, I just saw an ad for 3D Times Square billboard, which I had no idea existed, but a different technology. But that here I go and write about it, and there it is. The thing that shocked me was that when I started digging into the research, after I decided, okay, well, you know, that would be an interesting engine for this particular book, I found that there's actually a conspiracy theory these days that says that NASA and the deep state are planning to fake the second coming of Christ. So, but the other aspect of this, and you were when we were off the air, you were talking about cult leaders and authoritarian leaders, and I have an unscrupulous evangelist in this plot is luring disadvantaged homeless people to a retreat. He calls it a retreat, a large farm on promises of food, but then he's number one, he won't let them leave, but number two, he's encouraging them to fast and then to starve themselves so that they can see Jesus. Now, those kinds of things have gone on, of course, throughout history and other places. Transplanting that plot to rural Missouri, which is the environment of the Preacher Evan Wycliffe series, and my family 2 generations back, that's where they're from. So I'm a Californian now, but my roots are in the Missouri soil. So just north of Lake of the Ozark, the middle part of Missouri there, which is mostly farmland, but is difficult to make money with a family farm these days because, of course, everything is corporate and GMO and all that good stuff. But transplanting that to the United States, you would think that would be so much more difficult to pull off as a plot or as a scheme. And then I began to realize that, well, yes, you would think technology, overflight and drones and geologic mapping and all this stuff would disclose something that was going on. But then when you really get down to it, you find that those technological tools could also be used as obfuscation. In other words, if you've got stuff going on, then you've also got a whole chorus of people on social media saying, no, the video feeds that you're getting from this place showing these people suffering, that's all made up. That's all fake news. And that's also one of the things that you find routinely in spy stories. And John le Carre was a master at disclosing this kind of thing, is that in today's world, you can't really keep a secret, whether it happened to be an assassination plot or false flag operation or something that, you want to deny. But what you do is you have rooms full of people manufacturing fake news of alternative plots. And, you might commission a book or two.
There was the
movie
movie
going to come out at the same time. And you make sure that some of those stories are about as wacko as they can be. No, it was Martians that did that. No, it was UFOs that came from beneath the Bermuda Triangle, whatever. You've got stuff that is so unbelievable, and you go, oh well. And then when somebody's asking you about the story that's true, you go, oh, it's just one of those, and then you point to the rest of it. It's wacko like the rest of these. So it's guilt by association in terms of being unbelievable, implausible, and you're coming down to this whole idea of here we are in election cycle, and it's like, well, why don't people trust institutions? Well,
I mean, there was a movie back in the 90s, Wag the Dog, with Dustin Hoffman. Yeah. And I mean, that talks exactly about what you're doing, about how they manufactured for the TV audience the war that they were trying to say was going on, which it wasn't.
Well, and again, that's the engine of what would be called a false flag operation, where the wrong people get blamed. And, we see it every day on the news is, here there was a drone attack, and there are going to be people in the world who say, no, we did that to ourselves so that we have an excuse to do something else. So that's a difficulty. And as inquirers, as skeptical inquirers, and again, I have Evan Wycliffe. I mean, he's something of a reflection of myself, is that he was a bright student. He got a scholarship. He thought he was going to be a minister in his community. And so he goes to Harvard Divinity, and he discovers enough about the Christian church. He goes, not for me. Okay. If again, the history of the church is not particularly pretty, and it's mostly wars and the divine right of kings. So he drops out of that, and then he goes to MIT astrophysics, and he's, well, maybe quantum theory and relativity and all that good stuff is going to give me the answer to the meaning of life. No, he drops out of that. So then he also he ends up having a tragedy in his personal relationships at that time, and that's an ultimate discouragement because it seems like he doesn't have any future no matter what. So he goes back to the farm, and he gets jobs being there again. That part of the world, there isn't a lot of employment,
right?
And so he gets jobs as a guest preacher for the local Baptist church. And he works, because he knows how to use a laptop, he becomes a skip tracer. He tracks down deadbeats or people who are a bit behind on their auto loans for the local car dealer. And one of the things he finds is that he's really adept at negotiating win-win situations. The poor car dealer doesn't get to repossess any cars because Evan drove a loaner out to see the person. It turns out, oh, well, you could have that car back, but it was my boyfriend, and he took off with it. I'm the only reason I haven't paid is I co-signed for it, and I don't have a job. And he says, well, here, could you afford this car? And she said, "Well, yeah, $50 a month. Sure, here, I'll get a lift home."
Wow.
Sign here.
Yeah.
Car dealer's like, Evan, you were supposed to repossess that Mustang. Well, it's not around, but she's a paying customer now.
Well, I mean, so you're making some money, Yeah, I mean, I live in a town of about 9,000 people. And we had a grocery store, and Walmart closed it, and it's a small Walmart, but Walmart closed it, and we see a lot of mom and pop shops close up, and they put in more corporate type things. And so the job market, if you're going, we had a Motorola location here in this town. Before I moved here, it was back in the late 90s. They put a headquarters here. It was not the right place to do it, but the Motorola, I guess the family farm was there, and it's still there. The house is still there in front of the facility. But so Motorola goes bankrupt. Now, Motorola, when they put the plan in, they're like, we're going to help with the taxes. We're going to help do all this. So they did. And I wasn't living here yet. And then Motorola went belly up at that point. They got out of the phone business, and that's what was here. So that building sat empty, and then they sold it. And that person did absolutely nothing with it, didn't pay the taxes. It was sold again. This is where it gets real interesting. It was sold to somebody from, I think, Japan or China. I don't remember exactly, but he was a Canadian Ponzi scheme guy. And so he's in jail up there, and they basically they gave the land to the federal government, and the federal government sold it. And now we're making gloves there. But at one point, I mean, I've lived here for 10 years, and just last year, we finally had somebody back in that building. They had turned the plumbing off. I mean, this is a gorgeous campus. It had a movie theater, gym, everything. They turned the power off, everything. And we live in a place where it freezes. So you can just imagine the deterioration in this building. But for a long time, this is a place that could have had jobs. But the prior mayor's like, they wanted to turn it into a shopping center. They wanted to turn it into a water park. Mayor was like, nope, 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 nope. But finally, we have something in there, but it's still mostly vacant. And so there's lack of jobs in this town because there's this opportunity. And this happens a lot in small towns. So what you're talking about with no jobs being there, corporate America comes in, they buy up stuff, and then, yeah.
Well, one of the things that's happening in that part of Missouri is because it's just north of Lake of the Ozarks. Lake of the Ozarks is actually twin lakes. There's Truman Lake, which dams up part of the river, and then there's Lake of the Ozarks, which is somewhat bigger, about the same size. They call them the Twin Dragons because of their shapes, from the air. But Lake of the Ozarks has become very much a recreational tourist destination. So you've got yachts and jet skis and water skiing, that kind of thing there. And also casino culture. The casinos have moved in. And Truman Lake is still something of a fisherman's lake. It's more it's a bit less commercialized and calmer, more of a ringed with people in their retirement homes, people who are you're buying property there, and that also is not only real estate investment trusts coming in, but it's also foreign investment. And in the second book of the series, Preacher Fakes a Miracle, we've got a Russian oligarch who's coming in and buying it. Well, he's behind the casino, but he's in cahoots with the local investment banker who is Stuart Shackleton. He's something of an eminence grise throughout all of the books. It's like he even in the third book of the series, he actually has been accused of one of the murders that has happened, and he it turns out he's technically innocent of that one, but after that acquittal, because it seemed to taint his aspiring political career, he decided to announce that he was born again.
Oh.
Now, if you know your Watergate history, that would be the Chuck Colson story.
Yeah.
So then he flips some money toward Evan, and Evan thinks, well, Evan's thinking the best of people. It's like, oh, maybe he is born again. The church says I can't question his faith, so he's coming to me, and he wants to sponsor our new house of worship. So give us a place to seat 2,000 people, and of course the banker's interested in turning that part of Missouri into. If you go a bit further south, there's Branson. And Branson is Nashville South, if you will. Okay, so he wants to he wants to develop he still wants to develop the area, and he wants to run for political office, which by the time we get to this fourth book in the series, he actually has stumbled into. The lieutenant governor had a heart attack, and he got magically put into the job, and so he's chomping at the bit to get the big circular office. And it turns out in the Missouri State Capitol, the big office is not the corner office; it's the circular office. On the second floor.
Yeah, I mean, we had our little situation. We had a mayor that, while he was in office, he decided to open up a brewery, which is fine, except it's a conflict of interest, and he had to step down. But he was doing that for a bit, and they're like, no, we can't do that. And I mean, he still has his little brewery and stuff, and it's got a well-known reputation at this point. But yeah, he opened it up, and it was just like, can't do that.
In those situations, somehow it turns out that the licensing, there's not too many roadblocks to the licensing.
So that's a bit of a conflict of interest, but sometimes we can just overlook that.
Construction permits and those kinds of things.
Yeah. Living in a small town, this is something that I was talking to somebody that does construction the other day. My house is a newer construction. It was built in 2002 when the neighborhood was built when Motorola was still really well. And this was one of the last houses built in the neighborhood. Okay, so we're the third owners, and we were getting something delivered to the basement, and the person delivering is like, we can't do that. Then the steps need to be reinforced. Okay, so we call a contractor out, not thinking. We had a home inspection. You could go downstairs and lift our basement steps up. They were attached at the top, but they were not. No, you could. And I'm like, how does a house pass inspection? I mean, not just our inspection, but the city's inspection. How? So we got it reinforced, but still, it's like, I don't understand. I don't. How does a house pass an inspection like that?
Well, I will say that I lived in Africa for 2 years. My wife went to work in child welfare and animal conservation. And so we lived in Kenya for 2 years. And in Kenya, if you would go to the market, you would ride in a taxi, you would hear people say very frequently, "Oh, corruption is the mother of Kenya." And they said it almost like it's, e pluribus unum. It was just kind of a motto. And indeed, everything needed some kind of rubber stamp, and that there was the fee for the stamp, but there was also the accommodation for the fellow who wielded the stamp, So that had to be, of course, that was cash. But when we returned to the United States right before COVID, we often say we left Kenya because things got interesting there, not realizing things would get so much more interesting here.
Yeah.
But I often say I look at my environment today with Kenyan eyes. I see corruption, but I see also how sophisticated we are at putting glossy coating on it. There's no coating. If you get stopped by a cop, and especially it's right before Christmas, that guy needs money to buy presents for his family. Okay, it's like, we got stopped by a policeman. Our driver made a U-turn right in front of the American Embassy, and you would think, okay, well, this should be straight up kind of a place. The fellow comes over and he says, "Well, it's cold out here. Can you help me buy a cup of tea?" Well, I mean, he's asking for a whole lot more than just a cup of tea, but it was the fact that he had the nerve to ask when.
I mean, I grew up in the South in the 70s, and there was a running joke from when I would listen to my parents talk as we were going to the Gulf Coast. And I would hear them, "Yeah, you better watch out driving through that town because, John Law's going to get you." And he's going to be sitting there going, "So, son, you got a little extra cash for me? I'll let you go." And I mean, that back then, corruption, especially in Louisiana. I mean, we had the mob in New Orleans. That was until DA kind of got people out of there. We had a heavy mob presence, just like Chicago. So corruption in those towns in the U.S. back in the 60s, I think it was a little bit more known. 60s and 70s, it was a little bit more known. Now, as you said, now it's got a nice gloss on it, and we don't see those things. And when you were talking about Africa, I've had two guests, and I'm about to have another one, but I had one guest who, she lives here now, and she still tries to raise funds to stop child marriages. So when you were talking about child welfare over there. And then the other one, he had a farm. He now lives in Canada because they wanted the land. So they ran him out. And he had to flee for his life. He ended up in jail for a bit, and he got out, and then he went to Canada because it was just too dangerous for him, and they threatened him. So yeah.
Yes, land grab, especially if it happens to be something that it's either in the way of something or it's got some sort of, well, I mean, that part of Missouri in the old days, that was Osage Indian land. And there are no reservations anywhere in Missouri. There, as you know, if you watched Killers of the Flower Moon, all those Indians were driven over to Oklahoma. That's where the Osage, but Oklahoma is not the home of the Osage. It was Kansas and Missouri, but they were driven out in, I believe, the 1830s was about the last of it. But again, we also have now we have casino culture where that's some brilliant person decided, okay, we're going to make sure that I guess it's a give back, that will allow tribes to control casinos. I'm not sure quite how that works, but it's a strange dynamic of our culture. It's not that payback isn't absolutely needed and appropriate, but it's taken a rather bizarre form when we're talking about that.
Well, when you look at, okay, so 60s, 70s, pot becomes illegal. We're not supposed to be doing that anymore. We're not supposed to bet on gambling. We're not supposed to really have, we can have horse racing, but almost other gambling is non-existent except in Vegas and maybe New Jersey. And now I can't tell you how many slot places we have in this little town. Everybody's got a slot machine. And it's like, okay, but and so we're harnessing that addiction. And yeah, now I'm not saying pot should be legal or illegal. I'm not condoning, I'm not. All I'm saying is, isn't it funny that we're now back to that? But yet we've repealed Roe v. Wade. So it's very a weird, interesting swing of the pendulum that we're going back and forth because this over here was all illegal and now it's legal, but yet this over here was legal and now that's illegal. And so we're at a very strange time because it's a pendulum swing. We're going back from one side to the other, and we've released a lot of it. I asked somebody the other day because we have the I don't really want to get into religion, but since your book is kind of based on religion, we have evangelicals saying they're questioning what liberal speak it is when it's actually the words from Jesus Christ. But yet back in the 90s or early 2000s, we had it was the early 2000s, we had those bracelets of what would Jesus do? But now we have people questioning the Bible saying, well, where's this liberal bullshit you've gotten? And so it's like we're living, I almost want to say we're living in some kind of head trip because it's like, you're listening, basically what you were saying, you're listening to some fake stuff that's putting your narrative where you want it to be, and now you're not looking at reality. And I'm not saying that things are fake all the time or it's untrue, and I'm not saying the Bible's real, folks. I'm not saying it's not, just saying.
Well, in this particular plot, none of the politicians are claiming that the homeless people are disappearing from the cities. And they're being attracted to this retreat, this farm, whatever. And the thing is that this cult leader, his defense of what he's doing is, I'm not saying anything that other evangelists haven't said. Am I the only one preaching there's going to be end times? Am I the only one who's saying that, that the second coming could be any day? Am I the only one who's telling people to fast to cleanse their bodies? And so you get to the point of, and it's part of the first book. In the first book, Preacher Finds a Corpse, Evan finds the thing that really gets him involved in that investigation for the first time is he finds his best friend shot to death in a cornfield, and it looks like suicide. And he says, well, I knew Bob well enough to know that I don't think that's something he would do. And yet, the sheriff is convinced it's suicide. The coroner's convinced it's suicide. And so the question in Evan's mind is driving someone to suicide. Surely that's a sin. But who can be accountable for that? And who would have a reason to do that? And who would push him that far? And so then the same defense here, and this strikes very much close to home in terms of the political dialogue these days, is if this cult leader is telling people to do something that's violent, that will harm themselves, will destroy their community, if he isn't laying a hand on somebody, if there aren't any witnesses who can come forward and say that he commanded somebody to bludgeon this person or strangle this person, something to help them along, in their starvation, if all he did was preach, and yet here there are suddenly corpses found on his farm, how is he accountable? How could he be held accountable?
Well, here's my question: do we look back at Manson? I mean, think about that for a second. Was Manson, Manson directed them to go there, did he not? Charles Manson? He directed them to go there and do what they did. And yeah, he ended up in jail. So it all depends on the jury, I guess, or all depends on the court, how it's stacked.
Well, they're also in that situation, there was a strong element of what I think the jury believed was mind control.
Mm-hmm.
and I don't, and combined also with, you were talking about
hallucinogens.
the drug culture was very much um, part of the conversation then,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of what it would make people do. Much of it was misinformation in terms of, the idea that the intelligence community giving it to people in the army unknown, so that, and then some jump off buildings or whatever. And then you had people like Timothy Leary and Ram Dass, basically being run out of. I mean,
Yeah.
they lost their professorships. Nobody was, and you talk about stuff coming back full
Yeah.
circle here. There's a recent documentary on now controlled experiments with LSD and cancer patients, and the people, they go through an experience, and it's a very moderated experience, and they come back, and it's suddenly, oh well, they've lost their fear of death, and their lives are richer and whatever. And yet, so now we're talking about a beneficial drug.
Mm-hmm.
This is news, and we go through these news cycles where there is a visceral or an emotional reaction to something, and then and I would say uh, just about every controversial political issue that we have has been distorted by the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
There used to be a very bipartisan discussion about the 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 laws that should be applied to immigration, and the benefits therefrom, and the disadvantages that might come from lack of control, but now we've got it charged up with the idea that and this is combined with the fact that we've got refugee situations all over the world because of the disruptions. We've got, yes, we see video bombings in Gaza. The destruction in Syria was very similar. We didn't really have a whole lot of, I mean, there was some publicity about it, but I mean, nobody ever really acted like, well, okay, if this was anybody's problem but their own. And yet those people fled, those people, bombed out people fled to Turkey and then into Germany, and that created a huge pushback against immigration, all kinds. And then the influx of Libyans and Algerians going into France, of course, historically, if Marseille has a very sizable Arab population. So does Dearborn, Michigan, for
Yeah.
reasons I'm not really, clear about. But I mean, I guess that there are settlements where communities aggregate and feel as though they have a crux of power because they've got they're settling in a community. So I mean, certainly. In Africa, I could see, okay, this is where the Brits hang, this is where the Belgians hang, this is where the Germans, because there were quite a few different flavors of expats. There were a lot of South Africans um, that were looking for new affordable places to live because they felt that there was a lot of crime that they were fleeing in Johannesburg, for example. So yeah, you see that all over, but it's the fear. And I do think that this is the root and there's an outbreak of demand for authoritarianism all over the world these days. And it's, just make the bad men go away. And but who are the bad men? And the fact is, well, this guy's a badass, so he's gonna be our leader. We want somebody who's strong. Well, the problem is those types of leaders, they've been successful in the short term. They've gotten the trains to run on time. They've maybe stabilized the monetary system, but in terms of the actual good that they brought to society, read your history books, hasn't been very
But here,
successful at all.
this is the problem though. We change history to meet our needs. We I don't want to say whitewash, but I'm going to say whitewash. We whitewash it to meet the needs of whatever. So you don't hear how the
Oh,
Indian tribe lost their land. You don't hear about this Oklahoma bombing. We hear about the Timothy McVeigh Oklahoma bombing, but we don't hear about the Oklahoma bombing back then. We don't know that Central Park was not one Central Park. We don't know these things because we don't want you to know these things. Because if you did, then you would think that we were really not the best country in the world.
well, the French understandably objected to this recent biopic of Napoleon, of Joaquin Phoenix. It was a brilliant portrayal, but I mean, it basically showed him to be a relatively crude fellow who was a master of artillery strategy, and also showed his lusts, if you will. But the thing is that if you look back over Napoleonic history, yes, he had the tactics of a thug at times, but in terms of the way that he completely reformed the legal system, the parliamentary democracy all through Europe is very much a legacy of his influence on wanting stability, wanting to leave stability in the communities that he'd vanquished. But one of the things that really struck me traveling in Spain was, I mean, it wasn't until more recent years, I just thought this was going to be a country of whiter, more cheerful Mexicans.
Mm-hmm.
People in Spain are relatively, the Spanish national character is relatively stern and is more akin to German discipline than it is to, French, French libertines. And the example is the flamenco.
Okay.
The flamenco dance is a dance of defiance. It's not a dance of joy. It's a dance of, and it really arose during the time of Napoleon's conquest of Spain. And Napoleon burned everything in his past. He killed women and children all over the place, and he left that place devastated. And the Spanish national character very much. So it's not the place you think of when you go there.
Yeah. And I mean, New Orleans, bringing up Napoleon, there was one thing, there's a museum called the Cabildo down there. And when I was in school, we got a tour of the Cabildo. And the one thing that struck with me, it stuck with me, and it at the time made such a remark on me, was seeing Napoleon's death mask. They had it on display. And as a kid, I was just kind of fascinated that, and I still remember it. And that was, I had to be like a third grader. And it's still to this day, I still talk about it because it was the first time I guess I ever saw a death mask. And the fact that here we are, and this was when a man died, and they used to take masks of their face. And, New Orleans is Spanish and French. You have all
Yes.
that heritage down there. So, I think we don't really look at where we all truly come from, and the differences. I mean, because if you think about it, do you think if a Spaniard went to New Orleans now, the way New Orleans is, would they really like it? Because this is not what they envisioned, I'm sure. This is more, it's more the libertine thing if you think about it. New Orleans is, because it's a party town. That's mainly what it is. It's got great history, great food, great culture, but yeah, it's got
But
some
it
not
is
so great things.
yes, it has that tourist magnet aspect of Bourbon Street, and
Mm-hmm.
it's interesting how much how much that resembles downtown Nashville. Also, where I just was, is there 2 a.m, it's still going.
We were down on Bourbon Street during the day, and my husband had never been, and so I wanted to take him down there, and he's like, it was, I guess, around 1 or 2 in the afternoon. We get about halfway down. We hadn't made it to the strip clubs or anything, and he's like, "What is that smell?" I'm like, "Oh, honey, come on, you know what that smell is." He's like, stale beer. I'm like, vomit, piss, yes. He's like, do we have to go any further? I'm like, no, we don't. I'm just, just wanted to make sure you saw Bourbon Street. So yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, as well, you were talking about relocation and community and well, ethnic neighborhoods as it were. One of the things that happened this was part of the research that I did into, again, what was my family's homeland, was in that part of Missouri. That was no man's land during the Civil War. And the Union, one of the things that I learned, and it actually had an effect on my family, but I wasn't aware of it. I wasn't aware of the reasons for it, was that the Union troops came through as the war was beginning to rage, and they actually told people to leave their farms. They told them, they said, and again, this is the Israeli army telling people, don't be here because this is going to be an area of strife. So people left their homes, and then after the war, they came back to those homes and they found squatters there. And who leaves their home with paperwork back then? Okay. And, land deals were made with a handshake anyway.
Yeah.
And this actually what became an issue in my family is when my great aunt finally died. She was the last of her generation. I think she died at 94, something like that. But she was the owner of the farm that had at the time, I would say maybe the last 15 years of her life, maybe 20 years of her life, they had a tenant farmer there. So she was receiving the rents from the tenant, and the tenant was actually working the farm. Well, when the time came to put her estate through probate, they realized that they didn't have a title to that farm. They didn't have any paperwork. It went all the way back to maybe when the federal troops drove the Indians out in the 1930s, they did open the door to the people in the wagon trains, the people that were coming from Illinois, most of them that had taken the train from the boat in Baltimore. Go up through they gave tracts of land officially to people, so there may have been some paperwork there, but because there was no land title, what was decided with my great aunt's estate was they decided to gift it to the tenants for $1, and it said, I believe, in the conveyance that it said something like, to the extent that we own this, it's yours. In other words, they're kicking the can down there. They felt, okay, these people, it's their home. We're not going to kick them out of their home. And yet, and so, but how do you, again, how would you put a value on it? There were taxes, but maybe there were back taxes back when. Yeah. And, it created quite a stir. But that's a fascinating part of the country, and indeed also, as you say, small town gossip. Mm-hmm. That's often your source of news, because if you've had some incident happen and there might have been worthy enough to be covered in a local paper, but maybe there isn't any follow-up. Maybe nobody's really interested, and that's really the way these plots get kicked off in the Evan Wycliffe books, is that people come to him, often people in his congregation, but other people in the town, because he's not really an authority figure, but so much he's maybe regarded as somebody who could care if they brought him a problem. So they'll bring him problems that nobody else really wants to solve, or perhaps problems that somebody wants to cover up, and they're hoping that, the sheriff won't bother to look. So, he becomes very much not only a counselor, but a reluctant investigator. So, the amateur sleuth. But see, amateur sleuth really helps me as a writer, because I don't have a background in criminology or law enforcement. So I don't know any more than Evan does about how to investigate this crime. I'm just gonna, keep poking at it until, I can find something. So, but also in this one, there really had to be a grand jury inquiry into what had happened on that farm, who might have been accountable, what's the evidence. You've got coroner's findings. And one of the things and actually I found this in another mystery that I wrote, which is actually about a wrongful death of an African American, is that a coroner's inquest doesn't in any way fix guilt for a murder.
Mm-hmm.
A coroner can only make one of two findings: died of natural causes
or homicide,
died at the hands of another.
Okay.
Now, if it's at the hands of another, that opens the door to police internal investigation, grand jury,
yeah.
Indictment for a crime. But all that is a separate proceeding involving a completely different aspect of the legal system. That the coroner's inquest and the juries and even the prosecutors, I wouldn't call them prosecutors, the attorneys who argue both sides of that. If it's presumed to be a wrongful death by the cops will have an attorney there. An attorney wants that to be, that team wants it to be, some kind of natural causes. And one of the things that I found is that there are so many of these cases, and we could cite some that are very familiar recently, where the coroner said, died of a heart attack while being taken in from the shock of being taken into police custody. And, and the thing is, if you're talking about people from the inner city, the idea of having arterial sclerosis, if they're even older than about 30, they're going to have a fair amount of blockage in their arteries. Okay, so it wouldn't be inconceivable that this person could have an attack, and attack is cardiac arrest may be very difficult to. Certainly, yes, the person died, their heart stopped.
Yeah, but
but it's interesting how often you'll even read a news story where, for example, someone dies in jail.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't know whether they were, if there's no evidence of a blunt force trauma, no bruises. There are ways of abusing people without, necessarily raising bruises. So, they unfortunately couldn't stand the stress of incarceration.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate. I want to go back to when we were talking about your cult there. You brought up fear basically, and I think, we've had cults throughout history. We've had Jim Jones, we've had the Hail Bop, we've had as I was talking to you, the Mother God cult that was on HBO. The fact of the matter is, people don't look at these people and think they're master manipulators. They usually look at the victims and say something about how unfortunate it was. And they look at, like in the Mother God, they look at how her followers basically killed her. But the fact is, she thought that she was getting messages from somebody else and they were telling her what to eat and drink. But the same thing with the Jim Jones. He made his followers believe, drink the Kool-Aid, the end of the world is coming. And I don't think we really look at why people join cults. I did interview somebody once on the show about it being in a cult, but I think it's people are searching for something to fix them. They're searching for something, and it goes back to your fear thing, but they're searching for something to fix them, to give them community, to give them something that is where they belong. And with the great divide that you were talking about, how we're carving out the general populace and putting us in classes, which just creates more discourse. So you're going to have more people susceptible to somebody sitting there saying, I can make everything will be perfect. I can fix it all for you. And I can double talk out of my mouth that I'm not really going to fix it, but I'm going to fix it. And you're going to believe it because you want that comfort. You want that fear. As you said, you want somebody to come rescue you from the boogeyman. You didn't say boogeyman, but you know what I mean. The bad man.
Well, the idea of how humans build communities and societies, if you go back in the history of Europe, and again, we're talking about the history of the Christian church, the Christian kings of the Holy Roman Empire asserted that, the divine right of kings, Dieu est mon droit, right? God gives me the right. And even when, we were reminded recently of the coronation of King Charles, is that when it's the archbishop who puts the crown on his head, and at the moment the crown is on his head, suddenly he's got this channel, supposed to have this channel opened up to divine wisdom, and of course the infallibility of the Pope's pronouncements. The Pope is supposed to be speaking directly from God. Well, if you look at the history, this goes back at least as far as the Egyptian pharaohs. Most of the Egyptian pharaohs declared themselves to be gods, and they were worshipped as gods. And when, Alexander the Great was finishing up his campaign, he didn't know he was finishing his campaign. He didn't anticipate that he was going to die in Alexandria, but he was saying Alexandria was going to be this brand new multicultural country, and it was true. Alexandria had Jews, Greeks, Hebrew, every conceivable race and religion from that part of the world was. Alexandria was the Los Angeles of its day, no question about it. Okay. So Alexander was about to have himself declared a god. But what happened was, after he died suddenly, his general declared himself to be the pharaoh. Now, his general was a white man from Macedonia. He was not an Egyptian. So he called two religious leaders. One was Greek and one was from the Egyptian priesthood. He summoned them together and he said, we need to create this new state religion. And I'm going to be its head. And so they created the cult of Serapis, which we don't hear too much about these days because the early Christians did a pretty good job of just completely erasing that period of history. Okay. But the idea of declaring oneself to have divine guidance, divine wisdom, because people want answers, certainly. And it's a struggle to be a skeptic, as it were. And this is one of the things that goes on in science these days is, you have scientists who are just adamant of, this has been proven, this is over and over and over again. Well, pure science, if it's practiced the way that it's supposed to be, any hypothesis could be overturned at any time if somebody can show a new way of looking at it and a new theory that embraces more. And that's, yes, Sir Isaac Newton was right. You can basically get a rocket to the moon based on Newtonian physics. But if you want to calculate the orbits and bodies moving in relation to one another, you've got to listen to this guy named Einstein, who said that there's no fixed point to anything. But when you throw a ball in the air, it describes the shape of a parabola. Yeah, that's Newtonian physics. It's right within that context. It's right. But if you start saying, well, is the ball moving or is the Earth moving? That's a little bit more complicated answer. And if I rode the ball, would time be passing faster or slower than it is with the person who's watching the ball? One of the things that was pointed out to me is that we get proof of it every day now. Einstein gets proved any number of times these days because the satellites that give us GPS are going so fast through space that time is actually running at a different rate. on them. And so when you take a GPS reading,
Mm-hmm.
the satellite actually has to do a little algorithm to correct it before it sends you the data down, because its clock is not in sync with the one
I
on
didn't
the
even think
Earth.
about that, but that's true.
And
Yeah.
that's another proof of the theory of relativity, of which there are many. The other is the light bending as it goes around the sun.
Mm-hmm.
Like if there can be there's if the sun passes um, in front of a distant star, actually there will be a moment when you can still see the star at the edge of the sun, and that's because its light is being bent as it goes around the sun.
Huh?
So yeah,
Impressive.
gravity has the sun is so massive that light gets bent.
I could see that.
So
I could definitely see that. So, is there anything that we did not discuss that you would like to add?
We didn't give anybody a checklist on who to vote for,
Mm-mm.
but we did encourage people to use curiosity and challenge um, assumptions, and challenge their news reports, and uh, think independently, and yet we can wonder, where are the bounds between, for example, freedom of speech and freedom of religion? If one evangelist is running around saying, simply preaching the Bible and doing it sincerely, how is that person different from someone who's asking people to give put more in the collection plate than they can afford to feed their families, for example,
Mm-hmm.
which happens maybe every Sunday?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And I mean, the one thing also we have to say, because we've touched on AI, make sure you're not watching a deep fake. And they say that's going to be rampant this political season because AI has amped up so much, and it's getting better and better and better with the videos.
well, that phrase that they have now coined, living in the post-truth world, is yes. And I often, again, in the Evan Wycliffe series, there is this whole underpinning of theology, and why is there evil in the world? Why do bad things happen to good people? There are no ultimate answers for that. But it was interesting. I came across this. Um, it was a religious text, but it was written in the 1900s, and this fellow, clearly he was a Bible scholar, he was a Christian, but the title of the book was The Aquarian Gospel of Jesus the Christ. Now, how it had come about had been dictated in his sleep, whatever. But there was one quote from Jesus in there that just really struck me. And according to this fellow, Jesus said, "What I am, you will be." And I thought, why isn't that in the Bible
There's a
anymore?
lot.
I never read that.
There's a
But
lot of things in
but
the
you know
Bible there.
something? That sounds like him. That sounds like something he would say.
Mm-hmm.
Well, wait a minute. We've got this Christian church that no, that there's that other passage in the Bible that says God thinks you're filthy rags.
How many books though have been removed from the Bible? And I don't want to get into a theological
Well,
conversation because that's a whole
again,
other realm.
like I said, okay, if we believe that this is like every word, that humans put on paper is exactly what Jesus wanted them to say, or what God wanted them to say, I kind of wonder, because, again, you look at the history of the Christian church and you look at, okay, the book of Revelation, okay, second coming, all this other stuff. The book of Revelation wasn't even in the Catholic Bible for what was it, 2 centuries, something like that. Um, and I went to Patmos. Actually, I toured Patmos on our honeymoon, and you have to hike a mile up this tiny Greek island, which is swept by sea storms. And you have to hike a mile to get up to the top of where supposedly St. John's Cave is. And you realize, okay, I'm being hunted by the Roman emperor. I'm hiding out. People are bringing me food, and sea storms are whipping up outside, and no matter how many blankets I put on I can't get warm. Is it possible I might have had a hallucination up there?
Maybe. Just maybe. Maybe.
So,
Hyperthermia, maybe.
well, no, there's a lot of Bible scholars who think that that a lot of the symbolism in the Book of Revelation was actually about the current Roman Empire, the Emperor Domitian, who was the one who was hunting down uh, some of the factions that and John, who wrote the Book of Revelation, is probably not the one who wrote the Book of John. That was John the Divine. There was about six. There were half a dozen different Johns, and there's even a book by Barbara Thiering, the Australian theologian Barbara Thiering, and the book is called "The Book That Jesus Wrote," and she believes that Jesus survived the cross in an earthly body and then hid out, and actually he wrote the Book of John. So
Okay.
he ghost wrote the Book of John. So now I'm not saying this is
No, I talked to a neuroscientist on this show, and he wrote a book called The Tarot of Revelations, where he takes the major arcana cards from the tarot and ties it in with the Book of
oh
Revelations.
yes. Oh yes. That whole what they call the esoteric or occultic tradition in early European history, and that goes back actually, and even New Age, Course in Miracles, all that body of belief really can be traced back to the Hellenic era, and again in Alexandria. And it was Hypatia of Alexandria and the esoteric Greek philosophers, the idea of manifestation, the
Mhm.
idea of thoughts are things. That is a Pythagorean that is a Pythagorean teaching, if you will. And the idea of God as the unmoved mover, that's Aristotle.
Uh, and like if you the truth about tarot is tarot was a game that started, I believe, in Japan, and it migrated to the Europeans, and it was a card game, and then they divided it up because some people were using it for prognostication and others were using it as the card game, the traditional card game, so it branched off. So it's interesting how things change and challenge and get relabeled, i.e., the Course in Miracles, The Secret, when it was the basic principles of manifestation.
well, and the power of tarot really has to do with the universality of the symbolism. And you've got people like Noam Chomsky, the semantic professor, who believes that there is a deep structure to the brain that basically is the root of all languages, and also of all symbolism. Most of the books of Dan Brown are about, the Da Vinci Code,
Mhm.
about the idea that there are these symbols. Well, why is the cross such a powerful symbol, even centuries before Jesus? Okay, you've got Akhenaten and the cross and the
You
kind
have
of globe above it.
you have sacred geometry. I mean, there are so many different levels and different symbols,
Yeah, and there's a
Egyptian
new book
symbols.
by, not a new book by Graham Hancock called The Visionary, but it has to do with looking at cave paintings
Mhm.
all over the world, some 20, 30,000 years ago. And the idea that it's interesting that these societies were so far apart, they couldn't possibly have communicated with each other, but they used the same symbols.
Well, and then you go back to the things that you cannot explain, Easter Island, the statues on Easter Island and how they got there. There's more little pieces of how things throughout our history that we may land migrations, land shifts. Our planet has changed over time. So how did those statues get there? And there's talk about how they got there divinely and everything else. Same thing with the pyramids. How were the pyramids built? And yes, you can sit there and mathematically figure out how the pyramids were built. You can look at it, but based on the technology that they would have had back then, it does make you question.
what did they say? Something like you can't slip a playing card between some of those stones in the pyramid. I mean, that's no, either that's an exaggeration or because they said, well, with today's technology, we couldn't quite do
We
that.
can't even get a wall leveled in a house.
Wait. Now we're talking about walls,
I have
Yeah,
a
no, but
friend who's
razor wire work.
I had a friend who was doing construction on the shop that I work out of, and she's like, "Yeah, I can't get this tile to go in because the walls aren't level." So, yeah, I mean, the floor wasn't level with the wall, and it was just not even. So, to see them have the pyramid so perfect that we can't even build a building or a house with, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
well, again, going back to Graham Hancock, he has a book about the pyramids, and he claims that they were built at the before the last ice age, and that they were prediction of how often the ice ages come back. That they were basically a warning from the advanced society that you'd, and it was something like every 20,000 years, and we're kind of overdue. So the whole idea of climate change may just simply be the precursor of the ice age rather than, extreme heat or whatever. But the idea that there have been cycles, and it's only been within my lifetime that we began to understand, that a meteor impact killed the dinosaurs, and that, and then of course now we've got a popular movies about, well, what if that happened again? Well, there actually is a project within NASA called Planetary Defense. Now, it's not about aliens, or presumably it's not about aliens. It's about rocks from outer space and tracking anything that might get close. And I believe it took them, when they started that project, it didn't take them long to realize that, okay, there's probably not anything for at least 100 years we need to worry about. But they still have the Planetary Defense Project. So,
well, they have to build up because you're not going to be able to call Bruce Willis and crew to come blow an asteroid out. So they have to start trying to figure out how they're going to do this and stop this because, I guess, I don't know. I mean, maybe it is aliens. Maybe there's a meteor coming that we don't know, maybe there's something with a cloaking device. I mean, I don't know.
Well, it could all be a matter of semantics. I mean,
there's some semantics. All right.
Some people say, oh yes, they have a belief in angels. Other people have beliefs in extraterrestrial beings. What if those are just different names for the same thing?
It's highly possible. I mean, that's the thing. We go back to trying to label things and class things, and it's really just, why do we do that? I've talked about to people on the show about this a lot. It's like, why do we classify that? Why does it have to be classified? It goes back to your number or your data thing, because the conversation I had with the director recently, we're talking about the fact that, okay, because he's divorced and I'm a widow, and it's like, what does this matter? But I have to be classified that in my insurance and on my health records that I'm a widow, and he's got to be It's like, what point do we become single again? Because that's the truth. But no, we're going to make you this. And it's like, to me, as I've said before, a widow just is this big neon sign of, oh, you're alone, you're going through grief, and you may have a life insurance policy. Hi, let me introduce myself.
Oh my.
Really? Go pound sand. I don't have time for this, because I don't want some oil, the oil rig worker on Facebook that lost his wife, the doctor on Goodreads that lost his wife, and it's all BS. But here, and it's like, there, because of those classifications, why do we have to be classified as that? Why can't I just be single? But
there is a principle, I believe I heard it in connection with New Age philosophy, but I don't know. Certainly I'm sure that there's a psychiatric aspect of it, a psychological aspect of it, but the idea when strangers meet, one of the rituals, if you will, is trading wounds.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that happened to me too.
Mm-hmm.
And the teaching that I heard was that if that's the initial transaction, that will remain the basis of communication between those two people, even throughout like a lifetime friendship, is the fact that they'll never be able to get over that because they are continually reinforcing that identity of being the wounded person.
Right. Well, and here's the thing, as you're talking, then there's the whole avenue of, well, you're a woman of a certain age and you're single. Have you never been married? What's wrong with you? If you're single and you're not divorced and you're not widowed, then how can you still be single? And I mean, there's a whole other caveat because once again, we've put these labels and you're talking about the wound. So if I'm single and I'm 50 something years old and I'm single, well, what is wrong with you? Because we have that expectation that you cannot be single for that long. Even that goes with guys. Guys are the same way. You cannot be single. So then we put you in this lump. And well, if you're divorced, you must be damaged goods. And if you're widowed or a widower, well, you poor soul. So it goes back to that wound thing.
That becomes that certainly becomes an engine of small town gossip for sure, because you've got those kinds of people wanting to find ways of either relating to you or to have their colleagues or friends relate to you. In other words, how does that person fit in with our clan or our tribe? Or and when I was in Africa, when I first went there, I was very sensitive to the idea of, I'm just so steeped in black-white racism in this country, is ultra sensitive of like, am I going to have to kind of watch myself in terms of, how am I going to be greeted? Okay. And one of the things that I found was that, in a sense, the old colonialism is somewhat so yesterday, because if you're an American or a European and you're going to show up in Kenya, you are either a tourist and you're here to spend money, or you're a businessman and you're here to spend money. Okay, so
Uh-huh.
so it's like, by the way, brother, my money's in your pocket. You just don't know it yet. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the attitude. But there are 43 different tribes in Kenya, and only 3 of them have had power since independence. So
Wow.
the resentment among those tribes and the land grabs. I mean, there was just recently a big part of Maasai land was I don't know what you say, repossessed. I mean, you were talking about kicking people off their property. Tanzania decided that there was a big part of Maasai land which had basically been that way for centuries, that they wanted that repurposed. And that's, I believe, borders of Serengeti, or it's in the Serengeti. But these things are going on a daily basis now, and it was fun. It was interesting because I had really no appreciation at all of East Indian culture in Africa. And yet this is so much a part of their history of now. It was just last year that the Kenyan government said, oh, we're going to declare Kenyan-born Indians the 44th tribe
Wow.
of Kenya. And yes, Indians as a class, yes, many of them were brought to Africa as slaves or farm workers, but in today's culture, you have hotel owners, bank owners,
Yeah.
real estate development people. I mean, this is a whole social class that has its own cachet of culture around it, of never buy a car from an Indian. I mean, it just, I
Yeah.
mean, and yet, I mean, I believe it's is it Velshi on MSNBC? He's a Kenyan-born Indian, uh,
I don't know because I don't have MSNBC.
Okay, one of those. All right.
Yeah, I did. No, I stream. I only stream at certain channels, and that's it.
I'm just teasing. I'm just teasing. She wouldn't watch. Yeah, no, but and well, of course, actually now the Prime Minister of England. His mother, I believe, was a Kenyan Indian. I mean, they're again. I mean, well, actually, your politicians from Louisiana.
Yeah. The governor. Yeah. Well, and I want to say, you're talking about small town.
Bobby Vindel.
Bobby Vindel. Yeah.
You're right.
When my husband died, I only know a handful of people in this town, and I was friends with a beautician here. So I'm at Walmart going to a little grocery shopping. This woman that was barely an acquaintance of mine sees me in the parking lot and goes, "Donna, I heard about your husband," really loud. And I'm just like mortified because I don't want everybody to know my business. But yeah, here we are. She comes over and starts, so living in a small town, gossip travels.
Well, this Preacher Stalls the Second Coming is set in a very, very small town in rural Missouri, and it's got that fascination of, there's one diner where everybody hangs out, the Come On In. Okay.
You don't even want me to start on a story about the small town near here because it's just straight up racist. It is. So yeah. Anyway. Anyway, so I think we've covered everything. And your book, Preacher Stalls the Second Coming, is coming out on March 5th, as we talked about. So yeah, thank you for coming on.
GeraldEverettJones.com, and there are it's with Gerald with a G and Everett with 2 T's. And I used to be called Jerry Jones, but I didn't want people knowing that I owned the Dallas Cowboys. So, I write under Gerald Everett Jones. And if you go to the website, you will find places where you can download review copies of books, and you can see the entire book list of 14 novels. And then there's I have a Substack blog called Thinking About Thinking. And I often review other books, not mine, that you might be interested in exploring. So, but thank you for having me, Don. It's been a genuine pleasure, and it's so refreshing to have a like mind that is just interested in exploring wherever we wanted to go.
Well, that's what I like doing this show for. So thank you for coming on.
Thank you, Don. Sean.
So the conversation with Gerald was one of those conversations that went all over the place and then back again. So we talked about, well, what didn't we talk about? We talked about politics, or we kind of glossed over politics. We talked about political corruption, and we talked about religion and fear and how the metaphysical religion and manifestation has a long history that dates back way, way further than The Secret. But we all know this. And what happens is, and it's kind of like what we're talking about with cults, that we want something that's going to be comforting. So somebody writes a book or retreads a book because they get the information and then we retread it. And I'm not, I write books, so I know what I'm saying. And somebody's like, well, your story's retreaded. Yeah, okay, maybe it is. But it's a matter of how we package it and how we tell it and throwing our spin on it and creating our stories. So if somebody resonates more than just with a stereotypical book on manifestation, we'll just throw that out there. With The Secret, because The Secret's going to give you these little nuggets, then that's going to hit home. When I was working on my best friend's wedding, The Celestine Prophecy, everybody on set was reading it. And I'm talking about being in the extra tank and having, I think there was like 500 people in there, between 200 and 500, and everybody had a copy. And I'm like, what are you reading? And we didn't have smartphones at the time to distract us, so everybody's reading a book. And I remember asking, and they told me about it. And so, yeah, I had to go out and get a copy. Now, I'm not one typically to go and jump on what people are all in love with. I typically do not do that. And it's really bad if somebody has seen a movie and they preach to me how great this movie is over and over and over again, and everybody's talking about it. Most of the time I step back from that because it's just not something, because it'll never live up to the hype. rarely does it live up to the hype of everything. So, like right now, we have that Stanley Cup. Okay, it's a cup, but everybody's going crazy for it. And Cabbage Patch Babies back in the day, that was something that people clamored for. I think that we need to kind of not always look at what everybody's saying about something, that this is the best thing ever. But like the Celestine Prophecy, it did resonate when I read it. And sometimes those things that are hyped are worth it because there's a good message. The Secret was overly hyped. Were there a lot of principles that were already in play by other books? Sure. But a lot of people bought into the marketing. And that's something that we have to really look at when we look at politics. We look at religion. We look at a lot of things that we are sold, because advertising and marketing is a wonderful tool. It's a tool that will get you to buy something. It'll get you to see a point of view. It will tug at your heartstrings and pull at your wallet. But is it really living up to the hype? Is it really true? Are the things we're being told actually true and sustainable? When you look at the political realm, and I'm not going to go right now about the politics we're in, I'm going to make a generalization here. When you get a candidate on a commercial, and I'll go back to an older commercial, instead of a politician actually usually saying, this is what I'm going to do. And if you hear any snoring, that's my dog, Charlie. But this is what I'm going to do. If a politician actually came at you and said, you know what? I'm going to take this here and I'm going to invest it here, instead of spending all this money on a campaign, which is millions upon millions of dollars, I'm going to take that money and I'm going to invest it over here, and I'm going to invest it here, and I'm going to do this for people. I'm going to make things happen. Would you be more likely to vote for him because he's actually doing something instead of wasting money, and he's getting word of mouth and he's getting internet sociability because he's doing these things, he's doing good deeds, he's doing things to help and make change? Or is it better for him to go up on a pulpit and talk and say, I'm going to do this, and does absolutely nothing? Because there's so many times when, as I've grown up, I've seen political ads where they will look at, and they're spending money, and they look at somebody, the opponent, and they're going to just roast them and tell them how bad they are and show all the negative things. And then the other one starts slinging mud back. And what have we gotten for that money that they've wasted on this advertising? Did it sway your opinion, or did you already have in your mind who you were going to vote for because you already said it? Because either you're voting party lines, you know this person well enough, and you know their record, or you're just familiar with the name. Do those ads really work, or is there a better way to invest the money? And what I'm getting at, I know that's like you're kind of off point, but I'm not, because we're being marketed the candidate that we should vote for. I approve this message for such. Okay, well, that's great. But what could you have done to change it? If we wanted to make change in the political system, and even with religion, I mean, you have I'm watching The Righteous Gemstones right now. And yes, this exaggeration, it's over the top. But at a certain point, when somebody tells you that, hey, you need to give me this, and I guarantee you're going to go through those pearly gates. They can't make that guarantee, but you want to believe, and you want community, and you want faith, and you want all those things to push you through. So you step into that and you allow yourself to go there. But is that the right thing? Is that really what you need to do? Are you willing to sacrifice everything for something that may never come because somebody needs a brand new Cadillac or an airplane? And I'm not just saying this because of watching the show. There was a person, the house I lived at in before. And yes, I'm a minister. I admit that. And no, I do not live beyond my means. I did it because of being a tarot reader. And in certain places, I needed to be a minister. All right, fair enough. But there was a minister that lived in the house that I used to live in. And this man had a Harley Davidson. He had a Cadillac. He had a Cadillac Escalade besides the regular Cadillac. So, and he was a minister. And so a part of me looks at him and goes, how is this possible? Now, granted, the house was modest. It wasn't a big fancy mansion, but he had all the trappings of the luxury cars. So that which is a whole nother thing, because do we look at the labels of how somebody dresses, how somebody, what they're driving? And you hear stories of, well, there was the little farmer guy who came into the car dealership and paid with pennies for his car. He paid cash for his brand new car, but everybody didn't want to wait on him because he looked like a dreg of society. So we judge and we look at things, and we judge people by the way they dress, by the way they talk, by the way they look. And then we look at the bigger world, and we're constantly marketed and constantly sold. And oh, this cream here is going to make you look 10 years younger. Is it really? Do we have proof? Did you, do we have this evidence? And even if we do have that evidence, now we have AI going, hey, yeah, it is. See, it's right. We can create any kind of illusion that we want. So in this day and age, I ask that don't fall for comfort. Don't fall for somebody who's going to give you a line. Don't fall for a cult. Don't fall for something that makes you feel comfortable, because just because somebody's message resonates so much with you, is it really the truth? Is that really who they are, or are they a manipulator? When I watched Love is God, or Love is One, excuse me, this weekend, and when I posted that I was watching it, I had a lot of people tell me, well, I feel sorry for her because her followers basically killed her. Okay, yeah, I do. That's true. Don't get me wrong. That is true. But there's a bigger caveat, especially because I am a reader. And it's this person who, she worked as a manager at McDonald's. So she learned how to work people. She learned how to manipulate people. She came from an abusive relationship. She had an abusive relationship growing up. She had childhood trauma. And then she ended up with men that were abusive. So she knew once she connected spiritually, she felt that she connected wholeheartedly. And then she started bringing others in. Now, some people may disagree, but was she manipulating these people to get what she needed? And then when you look at the products that were being sold, were there a manipulation of them needing money to keep them going, so they raise the price on something? There's an ad somewhere on the internet. I don't know what site it is, so I'm not going to quote it, but I was looking around for candles. And I mean, I my friend has a candle making business, and I used to make candles, and I looked and I typed in a 7-day candle. And in this candle, which is the same kind of candle you can buy at Walmart, jar candle, about that big, they were offering it for $600. And yes, it came with a spell too. But $600 for that candle, that'll cost you $1.97. So what I'm getting at, folks, is just make sure, once again, don't get taken in by somebody's marketing tools, or somebody saying that they can heal you, or they're connected to spirit and they're going to save your life. Yes, I read, and yes, I do get stuff intuitively, but I'm not going to sit here. And this is one thing as a reader, and I know people are like, you're going really long today. One thing as a reader is I never want to see my clients more than once a month, because I don't want you to become dependent on me. I don't want you to not be able to have your free will and make that choice. And granted, you can go see other readers during that time. You can see a reader that's going to see you every day, but that's not me. And I want to be responsible. And I think as practitioners, we need to be responsible. And that's the same thing with somebody who's a spiritualist. Please be responsible. You may go to church once a week. You may go to church twice a week. But remember, you have free will. You have free thinking. So allow yourself to be open to what really resonates with you, and not what people tell you should resonate with you. So on that note, I will step off my soapbox, and I will say, as I always do, thank you to Rich Tsai from Third Year Audio Productions for doing the audio, and thanks to Fast Susie for the intro and outro music. And most of all, and most importantly, thank you, the listener, for tuning in whenever you're listening to it, whether it be evening, morning, midday, the weekend. I really appreciate you listening. And if you want to be a guest on the show, please drop me a line at Donna, Dauna, at thebetter2podcast.com. That's Donna at better2podcast.com. And as always, guys, thank you for listening, and I'll catch you next time. Bye.